Welcome to the second part of the third session of Technology and Urban Design, the Digital City and Beyond. In the first part, we discussed the larger problems that affect cities and the possible solutions that we are looking at over the next few years, uh, and uh, and the impact that they could have on the city as a whole. But let's start to look at more specific technologies and ideas that could radically change the way in which we design and live in cities. A few of these emerging ideas and emerging technology. Let's begin with the new materials that are emerging in the next few years, and these are technologies and materials that could potentially survive or die out depending on how successful they are. There is a lot of talk of a self-repairing asphalt which could make our roads and other transport infrastructure inherently safer simply because it can heal itself instantly and thereby reducing the chances of accidents and other unfortunate events from occurring. There are materials, the insulating materials that could radically change the way architecture and urban design looks and works. One of which is shown here, which is essentially a thermo bimetal, which is photosensitive and heat sensitive. So essentially, these metals could radically reshape the way in which we look at facades and surfaces, which would have a direct impact on the aesthetics as well as the formal nature of this of the urban space. And if and these materials will radically reform our understanding of perhaps things as essentially architectural as windows and doors. There are new cutting edge materials like graphene, which is essentially an allotrope of carbon, a very thin slice of carbon, which has almost unheard of properties of insulation and conductivity, which could radically change the way many of these changes are radical. But they will. But this is a material that shows extreme promise in terms of how it could reshape electronics, and we could start to see electronics that look like the image I have that I'm showing you, which where we could end up with electronic devices that are infinitely flexible, and this could have truly perhaps revolutionary effect on how form works, given that buildings are now no longer just buildings, they're also canvases for electronic images to flow, and any photographs of places like Tokyo or Hong Kong will exhibit that, and even in Times Square in New York, exhibit that really profoundly. There are materials that haven't really been explored yet, like aerogels are the lightest artificial material known to man, and these display fantastic properties of insulation which could really change the way in which we use energy in cities, and also perhaps change the way in which we build cities, and that will have a direct impact on urban form simply because number of components of architecture that we now deem necessary would no longer be relevant to us. We are also looking at old materials and trying to use them in a radically new way. This is an example of a wooden skyscraper that is proposed in Canada, which essentially uses perhaps one of the oldest building materials known to man, and uses it in a context that has never been used before. And this is possible because we now have ways of strengthening the wood. We now have ways of making the wood fire retardant, and we have ways of preventing insect attacks. And therefore, these old materials could be regenerated into something radically different and create something that would be perhaps new but old at the same time. Current technology that is very much on our doorstep is this concept of 3D printing. Now, 3D printing is an idea that has been around architecture for a while now. People have been printing the small things like that small bunny that you see for nearly 10 years now. And architects have already found uses for it in the building of models and the building of essentially taking creating a far more accurate model of buildings and spaces vis-a-vis perhaps a more human creation, such as the manually built models. This idea is now experimenting with this idea by taking it onto an actual scale to the scale of architecture, and we're already talking about components and of buildings being printed three-dimensionally and then being assembled at sites. And this is an idea that will radically change the way in which we build buildings, but it can also have great potential in terms of creating things like emergency housing, reshaping the way in which we perceive architecture, and ultimately perceive urban form as a conglomeration of smaller architectural forms. This idea is a concept that is going to attack our consciousness in a very profound way in the next few years. And as architects and urban designers, we need to engage with this particular form of technology and this particular form of production to create something new within what is already an existing piece of tech. Ideas of technology in the last decade and perhaps 2 decades is mobile technology. We have seen our devices get smaller over the years, and we have seen them become interactive and far more flexible in the last few years. However, we are perhaps only at the beginning of what is possible within this context, and we are already talking about things like transparent displays, which is possible perhaps due to materials like graphene. We are talking about flexible displays, which are possible because of new technologies like organic LEDs, which are already in the market to a certain extent, but these flexible displays could get far more flexible in the next few years. And an aspect of these displays being flexible is that they are ultimately moving towards being wearable. This is technology that's already penetrated the general market itself. But this sheer mobility allows us to radically, change the way in which we perceive and interact with urban spaces. And we've already discovered that through our use of GPS and a number of other different things. But this sheer mobility could open up new ways in which we could interact and move through cities, and ultimately this will perhaps ultimately change the form of the city itself, and that is something that is very near future. And all of this would become possible given that we're talking more and more about smart cities through a freely available, perhaps an endlessly available internet, which is possible through concepts like through standards and concepts like WiMAX, which are in our immediate future, and will allow these mobile devices to be optimized and be used in unique ways. And something that we have done very successfully in the last few decades, and something that that we have managed to do as technology has developed, is to map cities. And we've mapped cities in with far greater success and far greater precision now than we have traditionally. And given that mapping cities is as old as cities themselves, our new ways of mapping cities different is that we are taking features of the cities, such as this map of essentially pedestrian movement in Manhattan, and starting to draw it on the map, and thereby starting to understand how cities work far better than we ever did before. And we can do this with different data points like crime and events, and different kinds of points of data can be spread onto a map, and that would allow us to understand these cities better and protect citizens better and give them better access to services. and GIS, which has been or the geoinformatics system, which has been there for a while now, is actually getting better and better, and this is helping us understand and reshape cities in a manner in which we have never been able to do before. This extends not only in 2 dimensions, but it can go to 3 dimensions as well. And this ability to map cities in both X, Y, and Z axes allows us to start to rethink this idea of 2-dimensional zoning and 2-dimensional functionality, and then perceive the city and then build the city as a 3-dimensional construct. And this will have profound impacts on the urban planning, urban design, and architecture. And this is something that will eventually perhaps lead to a more comprehensive understanding of the city than is currently available to us. An aspect of mobile technology that has emerged in the last few years is a concept called augmented reality. Essentially, this is an idea that stands between virtual reality and unfiltered perception. Augmented reality is essentially normal perception of space with data added to it. We can now, a famous example of this is the Google Glass, which was a very which is something that has emerged in the last few years. And the Google Glass is essentially allows you to look at spaces that are available everywhere, but it also simultaneously overlays information such as weather, addresses, and so on top of your perception of what is actually there in front of you. And this is great potential for our understanding of our interaction with environments. This is a photograph of the famous Sixth Sense project by an Indian, Pranav Mistry, which essentially allows us to interact with everyday surfaces like your hand or a piece of paper, and allows you to make phone calls and play games on them. And thereby we're taking reality, but we're also augmenting it through information. This will be something that would completely change the way in which we interact with surfaces and interact with objects within the urban form. This is an application that which directly looks at augmented reality and in an urban context, where you can see a photograph of the sewage lines and the electrical lines running over a live streaming image of a building itself. And within this, you can see that this could have immense applications in navigation, in services, in form itself. And that taken to the next level would be something like this, where you could walk down a street and then see all the information available to you as you interact with the city itself. This will essentially help us traverse the city and negotiate with the city through live data and in real time as things happen, and this could once again radically change the way in which we understand cities, and this will in turn change our idea of urban form in ways that we perhaps can't even predict at the moment. These ideas have already started to become important, and we start to see, and this is from the MIT Media Lab, MIT Changing Places Lab, where they have started to use this augmented reality and interpret it in an urban context, and ultimately leading to design solutions that are partly virtual and partly physical, as augmented reality is meant to do. And this allows to design as well as study the implications of their design in real time by playing around with the data that the augmented reality model gives. At the same time, create solutions that respond to the problems that they perceive in the first place. Another important concept which is deals with perhaps the most troubling aspect of urban design and urban planning, which is transport. And since the invention of the motor car, we have always had a very difficult relationship with the car and the autonomous vehicle, and or rather the individual vehicle. If we can now rework that concept, which people like Google have started to do by putting a lot of essentially feeding the car data, and we've already done this extensively in car embedded GPS and other concepts which allow people to navigate cities in a far more efficient way than they would if they perhaps drove, if they navigated themselves. And this allows the vehicle to become not just a receptacle for technology, but also a participant in the wayfinding of cities. This already existing idea has led people like Google and other entrepreneurs to look at this concept of a self-driven vehicle. And this has great implications, since we can now, since if successful, a self-driven vehicle is potentially safer and could reduce the number of fatalities that we see every day in cities. But at the same time, it could also radically reimagine our understanding of what makes of what navigation within the city is. And you could potentially you could potentially park your car at a different part of the city, and then through your mobile phone invite the car to come pick you up, and then go wherever you wanted, and then send the car wherever you wanted. And this is possible because of this interface between the mobile, the wireless, and the car in itself. And this sets up very challenging and interesting possibilities for urban form, because the very structure of perhaps something as basic as a street would change, since addresses are perhaps no longer tied to a location or a number on a street, and we could perhaps see entirely different ways of organizing cities emerge because of this autonomy of movement that a self-navigating and a self-propelling vehicle would allow. In a more immediate sense, we already have vehicles that occupy lesser space and are essentially hyper compact vehicles, like like the city car proposed by MIT, which is essentially a foldable vehicle which can fold and then be placed and then take up far lesser space than a normal car would, simply because of its flexibility in form. This will have an perhaps unpredictable impact on the way in which we use movement and parking in cities, and and this is a very crucial aspect of urban design, because we are looking at large spaces of parking in the hearts of cities, perhaps being used for something else. And we can perhaps look at a kind of renewal of lost spaces that can be discovered and put to perhaps a more productive use. There is technologies and concepts that exist in perhaps the far future. This is one of the Hyperloop proposals in this ongoing ideas competition, which is essentially dealing with system that can traverse cities and traverse inner cities as well through a hyper fast vacuum based system. And this is a concept that could once again result in changes of a completely unpredictable nature in the future of the urban form. An interesting idea whose time has already come is the emergence of the drone, or a remote controlled vehicle, as a method of delivery. It is This is an idea which has proved very successful in military applications. We see the emergence of a number of commercial applications as well. But the drone is significant not for its ability to deliver objects, but the fact that it uses three-dimensional space to perform what are essentially regular tasks in an urban environment. If drones can radically change the way in which goods are moved within cities through a three-dimensional space, we are now looking at not just movement in the city as a two-dimensional experience, but we're starting to see it as a three-dimensional experience, and we're heading perhaps in some form towards some of the visions that we saw at the beginning of part 1 of ideas like the Jetsons and so on, where we can probably start to look at three-dimensional movement through jetpacks or something like that, becoming a mode of transport, a viable mode of transport, because of our experience working with these drones, working with these remote control drones. And they present a very interesting challenge as well as an opportunity to urban planners and to other form makers like urban designers. And we've already seen, and this is another example of a drone supplying medicine and food to remote areas. And this has immediate and almost infinite applications for the delivery of products and services. Let's talk a little bit more about emerging concepts that are coming. An idea that has been floating around is radical landscapes embedded in buildings, such as Ken Yang's many proposals over the years. And we are also talking about buildings being infused with, not just being as settings for landscape, but being infused with landscape, as this project by Michael Joachim that you can see before you. And this applied to an urban scale is something that intrigues us because we can now work on environments that we can now build natural environments into artificial environments, and then start to connect all of these artificial environments in this very complex proposal given by Arup. And you can start to see that buildings are becoming more than just buildings, they're becoming environments and cities in their own. And then when interconnected with other environments, could lead to some very interesting ideas, perhaps recalling things like archigram. We live in this age of big data. We're essentially collecting data on a scale of which we have never been able to before. And what that's leading to is to applications in cities which can lead to far better response time, and married to our ability to now map things in new and innovative ways. When we map as we map these cities and we start to put the data that we have collected into them, we can now do incredible things like date building, start to anticipate problems and create solutions very, very early, perhaps even before they become a larger problem. We see large cities like New York and London and Chicago start to use these and try to find applications for them to resolve issues like traffic, housing, economic disparity, and so on. And this will have an immense impact on urban form, and it's going to radically, once again I use the word radically throughout, but this is going to change the way in which we perceive cities and plan cities, and ultimately to design cities. This is going to change the way we design cities as well. And we can see these in a number of different maps produced, and all of these maps are produced by city governments to understand how their cities essentially work. But there is a negative side, and we're also dealing with the moral implications of collecting data on this scale, and we're forced to wonder if this is ethical and moral, and this issue of privacy versus data is something that is going to be a very significant urban question in the decades to come. We also have this idea of the Internet of Things, and as machines, the Internet of Things is basically an internet for machines, and and it's already begun in the sense that machines have already started to talk to each other, and we have your cell phone talks to your perhaps your microwave and your security cameras. And this has created a parallel internet which exists, which no longer depends on human interaction. And we are no longer the interface through which technology deals with reality, since the technology has now started talking to other technology. And this is something that is changing the way in which we perceive the world. And there are concerns that machines would eventually transcend into something into something far more powerful than they are now, by becoming by becoming essentially conscious and competitive with human beings. And people and a number of scientists, including Stephen Hawking, have expressed a concern that this growing intelligence that cities allow machines to have is is leading to something that is perhaps not beneficial to us in the long term. So ultimately, if we put all of this different technology together, we are entering a city that is fundamentally different from the city that we just left. And this is not, and these transformations that cities undergo are not new, but the pace at which these transformations are occurring is getting increasingly fast. And all of this technology that we have spoken about, all of it feeds against each other, and we're headed to a new city and a new understanding of cities that could perhaps be wonderful, or perhaps be dangerous, and perhaps be something that is unknowable. But the fact is that the city is something, has always been unknowable in its own way. But all of this technology is perhaps making it increasingly available to us, but also making it making it complex to a degree that we may no longer have complex to a degree that doesn't allow us to be masters of the city anymore. And we may have to cede a little bit of our control to our own inventions and our own perceptions of the future. Thank you.